Hello and welcome to Vantage This Week, a show where we recap the highlights of the week gone by. It's been a chaotic week in Venezuela. Last week, President Nicolas Maduro was captured by the United States. This week, he was produced in a U.S. court where he pleaded not guilty to charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, a new interim president has been sworn in. We'll break down what is unfolding in the country and what it means for its future. In the U.S., Donald Trump is hardening his position on Greenland. He says the U.S. needs Greenland for national security. That stance is now sparking a crisis inside NATO. Is Trump's position killing the alliance? We'll discuss that. In Iran, protests have entered their second week. They were sparked by a collapsing currency and a deepening cost of living crisis. Amid the unrest, a new report is out which says Ayatollah Khamenei may be leaving Tehran for Moscow. We'll tell you more about that. And finally, why are car makers ditching touchscreens and bringing back the old physical buttons? All this and more lined up. Let's get started. Donald Trump is not your typical politician. His speeches are different, his policies are different, his style is different, and turns out even his regime changes are different. 3 days ago, Trump attacked Venezuela. The U.S. military captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, yet Maduro's regime remains intact. His deputy has taken over as interim president. His ministers are still in power. His military is still united. It's just Maduro who's been ousted. Like I said, it's a Trumpian regime change. Yesterday was Maduro's first appearance in court. He was transported from a jail in Manhattan to the courthouse. Dozens of protesters had gathered outside, some who opposed Maduro and some who questioned the U.S. attack. Inside, it was a tense scene. Maduro was wearing a blue and orange jail shirt. Both he and his wife had headphones on. His wife also had large band-aids on her face. There are no cameras inside the courtroom, so all we have are reporter details and sketches. And here's what we know. Yesterday was the arraignment. The judge asked both the accused to identify themselves. He also asked them to state their plea. Are they guilty or not? Both Maduro and his wife pleaded not guilty.
I am Nicolas Maduro. I am President of the Republic of Venezuela, and I am here kidnapped since January 3rd. I was captured from my home in Caracas, Venezuela. I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am a decent man. I am still president of my country.
At this point, the judge stepped in. He said there would be a time and place for further remarks. Today was just the arraignment. After that, the hearing was done. The whole thing lasted around 40 minutes. It was tense and emotionally charged. At one point, a man shouted from the back of the court. He said that Maduro would pay for his crimes. And Maduro shouted back in Spanish. He called himself a prisoner of war. After the hearing, Maduro and his wife were taken back to the Manhattan jail. Their next hearing is in the month of March. But how strong is the case against them? Yesterday, their lawyer focused on 2 points. One, that Maduro was immune because he is a president, and 2, that his capture was illegal. But experts are not buying this defense. Yes, the capture was illegal under international law, but once in America, that won't fly. It doesn't matter if you were kidnapped or extradited. Once in the United States, only the U.S. law matters. Then who can hold Donald Trump to account? Who can dispense justice for this attack? Technically, it's the United Nations Security Council, or the UNSC. Yesterday, this council convened for an emergency session, As expected, it was performative. Russia and China condemned the US attack. France criticized, while the UK hid behind vague remarks. And needless to say, the US defended itself.
As Secretary Rubio has said, there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation.
Allowing such acts to go without an effective answer would amount to normalizing the replacement of law by might, while eroding the very foundations of the collective security system.
The military operation, which has led to the capture of Nicolas Maduro, runs counter to the principle of peaceful dispute resolution and runs counter to the principle of non-use of force.
There was no effort to pass a resolution or a condemnation, and frankly, it would be pointless. The US is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, meaning they have a veto. They can single-handedly shoot down any resolution or criticism. But from yesterday's remarks, the US defense is clear. They want us to believe that this was not an attack. This was not even an invasion or war. Instead, it was a law enforcement operation. Basically a mission to nab an alleged narco-terrorist. That's what the US wants the world to believe. It's frankly absurd to hear. The US president is talking about running Venezuela. He's talking about taking over their oil, yet American officials are calling it a law and order issue. They're using the same argument at home. Yesterday, top Trump officials briefed the US Congress. The Republicans came out thrilled. But the Democrats, well, they had more questions than answers.
This wasn't a law enforcement action. They're lying to the American people when they say that. It was an unprecedented military action.
The U.S. military operation in Venezuela was a decisive and justified action, and an arrest warrant was duly issued. And now he has learned what accountability looks like.
The fact is, this is a violation on all counts. U.S. law requires Trump to get permission from the US Congress. Only then can he attack a foreign country. If not permission, at least keep them in the loop. That's what the law requires, but Trump did not do that. That's US law. International law requires him to take permission from the United Nations Security Council. Again, Trump did not do that. And what are the consequences? Absolutely none. Trump officials are taking victory laps. Yesterday, it was the turn of Pete Hegseth. He's Trump's Secretary of War. In any other country, he would be called the Defense Minister, but with Donald Trump, it's Secretary of War. And Pete Hegseth did not just praise the US military and their operation, he took a dig at Venezuela's Russian weapons.
3 nights ago, in downtown Caracas in Venezuela, as nearly 200 of our greatest Americans went downtown in Caracas, it seems those Russian air defenses didn't quite work so well, did they? Downtown Caracas, and grabbed an indicted individual wanted by American justice in support of law enforcement without a single American killed.
Venezuela does have a lot of Russian arms. They operate the Su-30 fighter jets. They also use the T-42 tanks and the S-300 air defenses. What happened to these weapons on Saturday? Well, nobody knows yet. Maybe they were jammed by US fighter jets. Maybe they were destroyed, or maybe the operators were inefficient. Frankly, that's not even the point here. The point is how frivolously the United States is treating this entire situation. Hegseth is a prime example of that. Listen to one of his comments on Saturday.
Nicolas Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around and he found out.
That man is in charge of the US Armed Forces. Meanwhile, the public backlash is growing. Protests have been organized across major cities the world over. There is genuine anger against US President Trump. Take a look.
Venezuela adalah atas nama kemanusiaan of Venezuela.
So just to recap, Trump violated US law. Trump violated international law. He went against global public opinion. He broke the UN Charter, yet he faces no consequences whatsoever. No Western sanctions, no UN resolutions, no ICC arrest warrants. This is not a rules-based order. This is a joke. Now let's take you inside the US military operation that captured Nicolas Maduro. The mission was called Operation Absolute Resolve. It began with months of planning. American intelligence tracked every movement of President Maduro, his routine, his security, and the structure of the safe house where he lived. They even placed sources close to him. Then in the early hours of Saturday morning, the US forces struck. Venezuelan capital Caracas went dark. Helicopters swept in and troops moved fast. And in just about 150 minutes, President Maduro was captured. He was then flown out of Venezuela and eventually put on a plane to the United States. Here is how Operation Absolute Resolve unfolded step by step.
It began in silence. No sirens, no warnings, just darkness over Caracas. For months, the United States had been watching Nicolas Maduro, every routine and movement, even where he slept. US intelligence placed a small, covert team inside Venezuela. One of their sources operated close to Maduro himself. The team tracked patterns and waited for the moment. By early December, the plan was ready. It had a name: Operation Absolute Resolve. Elite US troops built a full-scale replica of Maduro's safe house, steel doors, reinforced walls. They rehearsed every entry point again and again, practiced in darkness, timed every second, and memorized every corner. Then came the wait. 4 days before the launch, the order was nearly given, but the weather did not cooperate. Cloud cover was too thick, so they waited. On Friday night, at 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time, the order finally came. President Donald Trump gave the green light. The clock started ticking. Within minutes, more than 150 aircraft were in motion. Fighter jets, bombers, surveillance planes. They launched from 20 bases across the Western Hemisphere and finally converged over Venezuela. At around 2 a.m. local time, Caracas went dark. US officials say air defenses were hit first. Power was cut across parts of the capital. Then came the explosions. Targets included ports, air bases, and military complexes. Fire lit up the night sky. People woke to the sound of thunder, but there were no storms. As strikes continued, helicopters moved in low, very low. At 2:01 a.m., the helicopters reached Maduro's compound. U.S. Delta Force troops went in, heavily armed, prepared to cut through steel if needed. They moved fast, room to room, corridor to corridor. Then they came under fire. One helicopter was even hit. Still, it managed to stay airborne. Inside the compound, Maduro was already moving. He tried to reach a reinforced safe room, a steel door, built to withstand an attack precisely like this one. But he did not make it. U.S. officials say Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, surrendered. No prolonged standoff, and no escape. Just a man with his hands raised. Within minutes, they were extracted to the waiting helicopters. By 4:29 a.m., the helicopters were over open water, Caracas fading behind them, and the mission complete. Maduro was flown to the USS Iwo Jima. It is a warship that was waiting in the international waters off the course of Venezuela. Images later showed him handcuffed, blindfolded and wearing gray sweatpants. From there, he was taken to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. He was then transferred to a U.S.-bound plane. That plane headed for New York. Today, Nicolás Maduro is in U.S. custody. He is being held at a federal detention center in New York, and he faces charges including narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. The operation to capture him lasted just 150 minutes, but it was months in the making. Months of surveillance inside Venezuela, of planning every detail, and of waiting for the perfect moment. It has now changed Venezuela's future and America's role in the region.
You may or may not like what Donald Trump did, but you can't deny one thing. The military operation was an undeniable success. They disabled Venezuela's defenses. They swooped in, they captured Maduro and his wife, and they left without a fuss. No casualties, no losses for the U.S. It tells you how good the U.S. military was. But what about the other side? What weapons did the Venezuelans use, and why did they fail? Well, drum roll, some of them were Chinese. And our story actually begins in the year 2006. That's when the US imposed an arms embargo on Venezuela. The country was cut off from Western weapons. So who did they turn to? The Russians and the Chinese. From 2010 to 2020, Russia made up around 60% of Venezuela's arms imports and China made up around 16.4%. Beijing was the second biggest supplier of weapons to Caracas, and Caracas was Beijing's biggest customer in Latin America. And what sort of weapons did they sell? Well, three systems stand out. First is the JY-27A radar. These are long-range surveillance radars. China says they can even detect US stealth jets. Venezuela installed 7 of these radars in September 2025. Their defense minister was all praise. He said the Chinese radars had successfully locked F-35 jets. Remember, these are the most advanced planes on the planet, the F-35s, supposedly the most advanced. And Venezuela said the Chinese radars had spotted them. Then what happened on Saturday? Experts believe the F-35 managed to suppress the Chinese radars. Basically, the planes jammed the system. So that's one weapon down. Another system that Venezuela likely deployed was the JYL-1. Again, it's a Chinese radar. This one is also meant to track stealth jets. But this too seems to have failed on Saturday. And finally, you have Chinese surface-to-air missiles. Venezuela had the HQ-9 and the HQ-12 missiles. These are supposed to destroy enemy projectiles and jets. But on Saturday, they too appear to have failed. And frankly, it's not surprising. Pakistan deployed these same systems against India, yet Indian BrahMos missiles were hitting Pakistan at will. Now, just to be clear, we do not have conclusive evidence of what happened in Venezuela. Did their systems fail? Were they jammed? Were the operators inefficient? The fact is, we don't know. But here's what we can say for sure. Nearly 150 US aircraft targeted Venezuela, and some of them flew extremely close to the ground. Take a look. .150 American aircraft, some flying close to the ground, and yet no resistance from Venezuela. The United States had complete air control. Clearly, the Chinese weapons did not help. Maybe that's why the Chinese state media is so silent about this. But honestly, this goes beyond weapons. It's political and financial. China has cultivated Venezuela as a crucial ally, a useful partner close to America. This relationship flourished after the year 2000. Since then, Chinese companies have invested $4.8 billion in Venezuela. They also had an oil-for-loan agreement. Basically, China lends massive amounts of money and Venezuela pays the interest by selling its oil to China. This was the arrangement. Until now, China has lent around $100 billion to them. And initially, it worked for both sides. Venezuela found a buyer for its sanctioned oil and China found a new source away from West Asia. It was a win-win. But in recent years, that began to change. In 2024, Venezuela made up just 2% of China's oil imports. Plus, their investments were not paying off. As Venezuela's economy collapsed, so did China's bets. Nonetheless, Beijing did not abandon the partnership. Like I said, Venezuela was a useful ally to have. In fact, President Xi Jinping's special envoy was visiting Caracas on Friday. He had met Maduro just hours before his capture. And even now, China is defending him. They're asking the U.S. to release Nicolas Maduro.
China expresses grave concern over the U.S. forcibly seizing Maduro and his wife and taking them out of the country. The U.S. move is in clear violation of international law, the basic norms governing international relations, and the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. China urges the United States to ensure the personal safety of Maduro and his wife, release them immediately.
China will be watching the new regime closely. Will they preserve the close ties with Beijing, or will they surrender to U.S. pressure? At the same time, China will also sense an opportunity here. First, to rally the global south. Virtually all developing and underdeveloped countries have condemned the U.S. Rest assured, China will capitalize on this. And secondly, they will learn lessons for Taiwan. How the U.S. peddled their fake drug trafficking claims, how they began with isolated boat strikes, and how they swiftly decapitated the Venezuelan regime. I'm sure China's military will study all of this closely. Of course, none of that will help if your weapons don't work.
I just say this. We need Greenland.
Donald Trump is treating the presidency like a property empire, a global real estate portfolio backed by the world's most powerful military. Trump believes Venezuela is in the bag, he's making plans for its oil, and he's already set his eyes on the next target, Greenland.
Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days. By the way, I will say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. I just say this. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And the European Union needs us to have it. And they know that.
The White House has confirmed this. President Trump is actively discussing a range of options with a goal to acquire Greenland. There are three options on the table: buy Greenland, sign a legal pact, or send in the U.S. military. Let's break it down for you. Option 1, buy Greenland. The idea is not new. Trump floated it back in 2019 during his first term in office. And the logic is quite simple. Offer Denmark a deal and buy the territory outright. The Americans have done it before. In 1867, they bought Alaska from Russia. Back then, the U.S. paid $7.2 million for Alaska. In today's money, that's more than $150 million. Now, Trump is said to be weighing a similar option for Greenland. As of this week, this is his favored option, buying Greenland. And this is according to Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State. He briefed American lawmakers on Monday, and he mentioned that Donald Trump wants a purchase, not a war. At least not yet. So that's the first option, buying the island. Option 2 is forming a compact of free association. What does that mean? What is a compact of free association? It's basically a treaty, a special kind of deal. The U.S. already has such treaties with 3 Pacific islands: Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau. This creates a special relationship, a free association as they call it. It means that these countries stay fully sovereign, but in some areas like defense, it is the United States that calls the shots. Trump could take a similar path with Greenland. In exchange, Greenland would receive financial support and military protection. The third and final option is the use of military force, and it would be the most extreme move. Like we've been telling you, Greenland is not a rogue territory like Venezuela. It is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Greenland governs itself, but its defense and foreign policy remain in Danish hands, and Denmark is a member of NATO. So NATO's protections extend to Greenland as well. Any U.S. military action would mean attacking a NATO ally, and that would shatter the alliance. It would be an unprecedented and dangerous move. but Trump is seriously considering it. That's something the White House has confirmed.
President Trump has made it well known that acquiring Greenland is a national security priority of the United States, and it's vital to deter our adversaries in the Arctic region. The president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal, and of course, utilizing the U.S. military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal.
Needless to say, such statements have alarmed Europe. 6 European countries have issued a statement: France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom. They've all extended support to Denmark. I have a copy of their statement. It says, and I'm quoting, "Greenland belongs to its people, and only Denmark and Greenland can decide on matters concerning their relations. Security in the Arctic must therefore be achieved collectively in conjunction with NATO allies, including the United States, by upholding the principles of the UN Charter, including sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the inviolability of borders. These are universal principles, and we will not stop defending them." And here's what Denmark's Prime Minister has said.
Greenland is also a member of NATO. It is a shared responsibility of the Arctic states, including the Kingdom, to ensure that there is security, peace, and freedom in the Arctic region. But Denmark has always been a good ally of the United States. We want to continue to be so. But I also have to address some of what is being said from the American side. And of course, we will not accept a situation where we in Greenland are threatened in this way.
It's a tricky one for Denmark. Even in condemning America's statements, they're making an appeal. They're saying Denmark has always been a good ally to the US. And the reason for this caution is obvious. Even though Denmark has Europe's support, Trump has the leverage. He has the US military, and that's what accounts for the bulk of NATO's defense power. Europe itself relies on the American security blanket. How can it defend someone against Washington? Also, look at their reaction to the American attack on Venezuela. The US abducted the Venezuelan president, and all Europe could offer was carefully worded statements. No pushback, no outrage, no accusations of violating a nation's sovereignty. Europe remains silent. As the US takes claim to Venezuela's natural resources, Europe hasn't said a word. This has exposed their hypocrisy and emboldened Donald Trump. He's betting on the same silence to have his way with Greenland.
They start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
Iran is on edge. Protests in the country have now entered their second week, and what began as an economic outcry is slowly turning into a political test for Tehran. The protest erupted late in December 2025. The trigger was Iran's collapsing currency. It's called the rial. Over the past year, it has lost more than a third of its value against the US dollar. So prices of food, fuel, and daily essentials have shot up. Inflation is running above 40%, and for many Iranians, life has simply become unaffordable, which is why they took to the streets. Shopkeepers began closing their stores to protest against the mounting losses. Soon, university students joined in, and within days, people from all walks of life were out on the streets. Iran has 31 provinces. Reports say demonstrations have taken place in 23 of them. At least 16 people have been killed and hundreds have been detained. Security forces have been deployed across major cities, and clashes have been reported almost every day. It's a tricky one for Iran's leadership, and their response has been mixed. An acknowledgement of people's hardships, but also a warning against protests. Their so-called supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, says the complaints are just and that the authorities should speak to the protesters. But he has also drawn a red line. Khamenei says the rioters must be, and I'm quoting, the rioters must be put in their place.
We talked to the protesters. They should talk. The authorities should talk to the protesters, but there is no point in talking to the rioters. The rioters should be put in their place.
That message has been echoed by Iran's judiciary. It says there will be no leniency for those accused of violence. At the same time, the government is also trying to ease the economic pressure. They've announced a monthly allowance for the citizens. The government will offer about $7 to every person. $7 to every person. The money will come as credit and it can be used to purchase basic goods.
Individuals can receive an amount equivalent to 1 million tomans, approximately $7 per person per month, which is credited to their accounts for 4 months of Day, Bahman, Esfand, and Farvardin. This is credit. It is only intended for the purchase of a series of goods and is in line with reducing the economic pressure on the people. This plan will be implemented from around January 10th, and people can make purchases with the amount deposited for them on a monthly basis.
Will this measure calm the streets? It's too early to say, and the world is watching closely. Here in India, the unrest in Iran is raising real concerns about the safety of Indian students there. These are mostly medical students. A student's body has written to the government in New Delhi, urging them to ensure the safety of Indians. Right now, there are nearly 3,000 Indian medical students in Iran. Most of them are dependent on local hospitals and infrastructure. The student's body has appealed to the government to prepare an emergency plan if required. New Delhi for now has issued an advisory for its citizens. It is asking Indians to avoid non-essential travel to Iran and has asked citizens to closely monitor the situation there. Meanwhile, the United States is using this protest to build pressure. Yesterday, President Donald Trump issued another warning to Tehran.
You, though, there's been protesters killed in Iran. You said we were locked and loaded, ready to go. What is the line there for when the U.S. is going to get involved in those protests?
We'll take a look. We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
Trump has not specified what the U.S. would hit, but his repeated warnings have raised alarms. Iranian officials say the U.S. and Israel are inciting unrest.
Actions or statements by the Prime Minister of the Zionist regime, as well as by certain radical U.S. officials regarding Iran's internal affairs, are nothing but incitement to violence, terrorism, and killing in the language of international norms.
There are signs that Iran's top leadership is rattled by these warnings. A new report is out. It says Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has a contingency plan. He could leave Tehran for Moscow if the situation spirals out of control. Of course, Iran has not confirmed this, but the report has gained traction because of the recent history in this region. In 2024, Syria's former president Bashar al-Assad also fled to Russia after losing control at home. Although for now, Iran's leadership insists that it is very much in control. They're putting up banners throughout Tehran warning foreign powers against any military action. Meanwhile, Iranian diaspora is also making their voices heard. They have held rallies in the UK expressing solidarity with the protesters back home.
Change, change! Regime change! Regime change in Iran! By the people of Iran! Terrorists, they must go!
It is really important that we show our solidarity with the people of Iran because in Iran, regimes try to say, because of the censorship and so on, they try to say that you are alone, you have got no hope. But we are trying to say that no, we are here, we are your voice. And in fact, we are trying to make a bridge between the people inside Iran and outside of Iran.
So this is where Iran stands tonight. Protests born out of economic pain, a state drawing red lines, and a government trying to buy time with limited concessions. What does a world leader need? Many attributes come to mind, but some are more important than others, like decency, class, and wisdom. Just ask Donald Trump. He famously has none of these. Yesterday, the US president spoke at a Republican retreat. He was supposed to focus on domestic issues. It was supposed to be like a briefing before the midterm elections. But Trump went off script. He spent a lot of time talking about diplomacy. He also spoke about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. First, listen to what he said.
I mean, I had India coming to me, sir, I've been waiting 5 years. We're changing it. We're changing it. India ordered 68 Apaches, and Prime Minister Modi came to see me. Sir, may I see you, please? Yes, I have a very good relationship with him. He's not that happy with me because, you know, they're paying a lot of tariffs now because they're not doing the oil, but they are. They've now reduced it very substantially, as you know, from Russia. We're getting rich.
Three things to note. For starters, the imitation, extremely poor and tasteless. This is not how world leaders should talk about each other, certainly not about their partners. Secondly, it is not 68 Apache helicopters, it is 28. India bought them in 2 batches from the United States. The first deal was signed in 2015. Those 22 helicopters were delivered on time. The deal for the remaining 6 was signed in 2020, and those were delayed by 15 months. Normally, sellers would be ashamed of such delays. But look at Donald Trump. He is mocking the buyers for asking about the delays. It's classic Trump. Now for the third point. Trump says India has cut Russian oil exports. But that's not exactly true. In September and October, the trade did take a plunge. That's when Trump slapped 25% tariffs on India. During that time, we did see a correction. But since then, the exports have picked up again. In November, Russian oil imports reached a 6-month high. India was buying 1.7 million barrels per day. That was 4% up from October. In December, the trade continued. India was projected to buy 1.5 million barrels per day by the end of the month. What explains the revival of imports? Possibly 2 things. One, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited India in early December. Maybe his visit reset the energy ties. And 2, the India-US trade deal remains in a limbo. India has made multiple concessions, yet Trump has not agreed to a trade deal. So maybe New Delhi thought, what's the point?
January 6, 2021.
But coming back to the speech yesterday, what does this mean for India? Well, it's a strategy that we've seen before. Make public claims, reveal conversation details, mock foreign leaders and hope they fall in line. Trump used the same strategy against France yesterday. Listen to what he said about President Macron.
You know Emmanuel Macron. I love the French accent. Emmanuel. They said, listen, you're going to have to raise your prices a little bit because we're paying 14 times more than you. That's a lot, right? We're paying numbers. In other words, we're making up. We will not do that. Yes, you will, Emmanuel, 100%, because I was told they wouldn't do it. And this is, you can take Emmanuel and add up Hans, you can add up Ludwig, you can add every name in the book. It's all the same. The answer is no. We're not going to double our drug prices.
The American people must be proud. This is their representative on the world stage. The question is, how is India responding? New Delhi has not said anything about Trump's latest remarks, but Foreign Minister Jaishankar did speak about Venezuela. He did condemn the US attack. He did not rather condemn the US attack, but he did point out the double standard. When India retaliated against Pakistani terrorism, the world urged caution. They spoke about international law and restraint. But now, there's absolute silence.
They'll offer you free advice. If something happens, they'll say, no, please don't do that. It worries us if there is tension. Sometimes you hear people saying, like it happened during Operation Sindoor. Now, if you ask them, saying, oh, really, you're worried? Why don't you look at your own region and ask yourself, what are the levels of violence there? How much risks have you taken? How much worry the rest of us have about what you are doing?
India won't give up Russian oil and Trump won't let up the pressure. So what happens next? If there is a peace deal in Ukraine, things may improve. Until then, it will be tense. Trump was busy with Venezuela in November and December, so his attacks on India had suddenly disappeared. But after the operation, perhaps he's free again, free to target and mock India. He's trying to negotiate in public. He's piling the pressure through press conferences. But India likes a low-key approach, less noise, more work. It's a clash of styles, interests, and attributes, and it won't be ending in a hurry. So the trade impasse continues. Comments from Trump's team are rattling investors, and the impact is already visible. Look at the Indian markets. Through the week, losses have piled up day after day. Over the past 5 trading sessions, the Sensex alone has shed more than 2,000 points. The Sensex tracks India's top 30 stocks. This week, it fell by more than 2%. Same with the Nifty. The Nifty tracks India's top 50 companies. It has slipped below the 26,000 mark. So what does that mean in real terms? It means that the investor wealth has taken a serious hit. At least 8 lakh crore rupees were wiped out this week. That's well over $80 billion. All of it gone in a matter of 1 week. And why did this happen? One major factor is the trade deal with the US. It is weighing on the minds of investors. They don't want to see an impasse because it makes the investing environment unpredictable and risky. And the exodus of foreign investors is not helping. Consider these numbers. Right at the start of the year, global investors pulled out more than 7,500 crores from Indian stocks. That's more than $840 million. And these numbers are from the 1st and 2nd of January 2026, so the first 2 trading sessions of the year. And it comes on the back of record exits in 2025. Last year, foreign investors withdrew 1.66 lakh crore rupees. That's over $18 billion. It's the largest annual outflow on record. And in 2026, the trend continues so far. Foreign investors are relocating their money, and it is probably because of the trade impasse. So Monday will be critical. That's because of what's happening in Washington later this evening. The US Supreme Court is expected to rule on the Trump tariffs. The court will decide whether the tariffs are legal or not. And we told you about this yesterday. Trump's tariffs are facing a legal challenge. At the center of this fight is an emergency law. It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This law was written for crises, like wars or terror threats and national security emergencies. This law gives the US president special powers. He can issue orders without going to the US Congress for approval. But Trump used this law to impose tariffs, and he presented America's trade situation as a crisis to impose sweeping tariffs using the emergency law. The question is, can he do that? Is it legal? Can the president invoke emergency powers to fix America's trade deficits? That is what the US Supreme Court must decide on. Can the president use emergency powers to levy tariffs without lawmakers signing off on the policy? If the Supreme Court rules in Trump's favor, then the tariffs will stay. But if the court says that this is illegal, then Trump's tariffs could collapse overnight. This would upend Trump's trade policy and derail months of negotiations, including possibly the trade deals that he has struck so far. The bigger problem for Washington would be the financial fallout. And yesterday we told you how companies had filed more than 1,000 lawsuits. They have paid the US government some $150 billion so far. They were charged this money in tariffs. The companies were charged this money in tariffs. So now if the tariffs are struck down, the US government may have to refund that money. Although that refund will not be automatic, businesses will have to fight for them in courts. And that is why they filed more than 1,000 lawsuits in anticipation of recovering their money. Although experts are skeptical, they fear if Trump loses the legal battle, he could make it harder for importers to claim refunds by creating new hurdles or dragging the court cases. And all this only adds to the uncertainty that the markets already face. Yes, if Trump loses the Supreme Court fight, Indian markets could potentially bounce back, but Trump is unlikely to give up so quickly. He may not retreat. Instead, he could change course. And that's the risk that investors need to plan for. "2026 is already off to a weird start, but it's about to get weirder because the eternal beggar is trying to be a global power. I'm talking about Pakistan. For years, their destiny was clear: a failed democracy, a failed economy, and a failed military. But Islamabad is eyeing a desperate makeover. And their biggest bet? Weapons export, specifically fighter jets. Reports say Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are all set to sign a defense deal. It's worth around $4 billion. Out of this, $2 billion is loan conversion, meaning Saudi Arabia will write off that much loan, $2 billion, and the remaining $2 billion is additional payment. And what are the Saudis buying? The JF-17 fighter jet. Pakistan's Air Force chief was in Riyadh on Monday. Chances are he finalized the secret deal, and this is not an isolated move. In September, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signed a mutual defense deal. They agreed to defend each other if attacked. That deal came soon after Israeli strikes on Iran and Qatar. So the kingdom's thinking was obvious. They could not rely on American protection alone. They needed more layers of shield, hence the turn to Pakistan. Of course, Islamabad is always ready for such roles. They are the only Muslim country with a nuclear arsenal, and their goal is to basically market this, to hawk their military services and weapons. And it's not just to Saudi Arabia. Last month, Pakistan struck another weapons deal, this time with the Libyan rebel army. That deal was also worth $4 billion. It includes the sale of the JF-17 and other training jets. Reports say even Bangladesh is keen. Talks are underway to possibly sell the same plane to Dhaka. And these deals raise a lot of questions. First of all, what is the JF-17 fighter jet? It's a joint project by Pakistan and China. It's a lightweight multi-role fighter plane. The first prototype flew in the year 2003. The latest model was unveiled last year. Some experts say it qualifies as a 4.5th generation fighter. And where is it produced? In Pakistan's Kamra factory. This jet appears to be the backbone of Pakistan's sales. In 2015, Myanmar purchased these jets. In 2016, Nigeria bought 3 jets. In 2025, Azerbaijan signed a $4.6 billion deal. The same year, Libya signed a $4 billion deal. And now Saudi Arabia and possibly Bangladesh. Islamabad is hyping up these deals. Their defense minister says Pakistan may no longer need IMF loans. Why? Because they're selling so many jets. Now, to be fair, the exports are rising. Last year, Pakistan's arms exports hit an all-time high. They signed deals worth $10 billion. But if you look at the customers, a clear pattern emerges. One, Pakistan is selling to Muslim countries. They want to portray themselves as the defenders of Islam. And second, Pakistan is selling in conflict zones. Myanmar, stuck in a civil war. Azerbaijan was fighting Armenia. Libya, also in a civil war. It's a country under a United Nations arms embargo, yet Pakistan is selling them fighter jets. Like I said, there is a clear pattern. And here's the thing about selling warplanes. It's not a one-time deal. You have to offer training. You have to offer services and repairs. You have to offer upgrades. Basically, it creates a long-term partnership. At the same time, it's a risky strategy. You could face global criticism for selling in conflict zones. You could also face US pressure for selling to Saudi Arabia. After all, Riyadh is a US ally. They have always used American weapons. So why would the kingdom need a Pakistani-Chinese jet? Wouldn't the Pentagon oppose it? Well, Islamabad has a plan for that too. They have unleashed a mega lobbying blitz in Washington. In the US, foreign countries cannot lobby in secret. They must publish the payments and meetings in public. And those filings reveal the extent of Pakistan's campaign. Look at the period from May 7th to May 10th. That's when India's Operation Sindoor was underway. During this time, Pakistani officials made 60 points of contact, 60 points of contact. These were meetings, calls, mails, briefings. They reached out to Trump officials. They reached out to US media. They reached out to US lawmakers. They reached out to anyone who would listen. And what did they tell them? To somehow stop India's operation. And it frankly checks out. Because on day one of the operation, the US was not interested. Vice President J.D. Vance said this was not America's business. But the same J.D. Vance frantically dialed Prime Minister Modi on the 9th of May. So what changed? Maybe Pakistan's desperate lobbying. And it's not limited to Op Sindoor. In November, Islamabad signed deals with 6 lobbying firms. They are spending $5 million on lobbying. Imagine that, $5 million. This is a country living loan to loan, but it's spending $5 million every year on lobbying. And the sad part, it seems to be working. In early June, Pakistan's Asim Munir flew to the United States. He met the top executives of a lobbying firm. The next day, he met Donald Trump at the White House for a private lunch. Coincidence? There is no such thing with Trump. The same lobbyists have also been filling Trump's ear on other issues, like Kashmir, rare earths and mining. And each time Trump has parroted their line. It tells you where Pakistan's confidence comes from. They feel they will be shielded by the US president. Now, we have 2 words of caution here. First, to the buyers of these JF-17 jets, Pakistan will say these are combat tested, that they shot down India's Rafale jets, but do remember there is no proof. It's a claim amplified by China's bot armies. And secondly, just a reminder to Pakistan, never stretch your legs before you sit. Right now, Pakistan is trying to do a lot of things. They're in talks to send soldiers to Gaza. They're promising to protect Saudi Arabia. They're selling Chinese jets. They're inviting US mining companies. They're entering civil wars in North Africa, all while living off IMF bailouts. It's not a new strategy for Pakistan. They've always tried to punch above their weight. And each time, the Pakistani people have paid the price through violence, through terror, and through poverty. I guess Pakistan never learns from history. If you're a car lover, our next story is for you. Automakers around the world are quietly changing something inside cars. They're ditching touchscreens and bringing back buttons. And this is not a design trend, this is course correction. For years, car interiors have moved in one direction, bigger screens and fewer buttons. The dashboards underwent a transformation and car makers sold this as the future of driving. Also, there were practical reasons for the shift. Touchscreens were cheaper to build. One panel could replace dozens of switches and wires. Software could update features without changing hardware, and screens made cars look more high-tech and modern, especially after electric vehicles entered the market. So automakers began moving more functions into screen menus. The air conditioner, the music, the seat adjuster, in some cases even the glove box. What was once a simple press became a search through sub-menus. And that is where the problem began. Drivers started complaining. Adjusting the temperature meant digging through menus. Turning down the volume meant taking your eyes off the road. Even turning on basic functions required multiple taps. So simple tasks became distractions and a safety concern, and drivers did not like it. Then came studies backing up these concerns. Here's what they found. Using touchscreens took longer and distracted drivers more. In fact, in 2020, a research was conducted in the UK. It showed that using a touchscreen while driving could slow a driver's reaction time by up to 57%. So regulators began taking note of it. This is because driving is not like using a phone. You cannot look down, think, or scroll when you're behind the wheel. Every second on the road demands your full attention. Last year, the European Union came up with new guidelines. It has an independent car assessment body, and this body sent a clear message to car makers. If you want a 5-star safety rating, you need real physical controls for basic functions, things like indicators, hazard lights, wipers, horns, and emergency systems. You need buttons for these, not touchscreen menus. And this body issued an ultimatum. Starting this month, cars that rely too heavily on touchscreens will find it impossible to get top safety ratings. Having said that, this is not a ban on touchscreens. It's just a warning, a way to reduce the risk of distraction and accidents on the road. And automakers are taking this seriously. Volkswagen says it will bring back physical buttons this year. Its new ID Polo car will have real buttons again. Mercedes-Benz is also stepping back. This is after it pushed all-screen interiors for years. Porsche and Hyundai are also taking similar steps. You could say this is an industry-wide reset. Does this mean that screens are disappearing completely? Well, not yet. They will still have a role to play for navigation, for cameras, and for settings that you use only occasionally, or you change only occasionally. But for the things that drivers use all the time, car makers are rediscovering something simple: common sense. And that is why buttons are making a comeback, not for nostalgia, but for safety. Every week, 230 million people open ChatGPT and ask health questions. Like, why does my back hurt? Is my blood test normal? Does this rash look like it's spreading? 230 million a day. That's more questions than some hospitals see in a month. So OpenAI thought, if people are already asking about health, why not make the answers smarter? And that led to the birth of ChatGPT Health. It's a brand new feature, launched in the US to start with. It allows users to upload their medical records. It allows them to sync their fitness apps. ChatGPT then looks at all of it together. It analyzes the data and the information to give personalized insights. Sounds futuristic, right? It's almost like having an AI doctor in your pocket. But is that really a good thing? Let's break it down for you tonight, the pros and the cons. First, what exactly does it do? Think of it less like Dr. ChatGPT and more like a qualified medical intern. It cannot medically diagnose you, not yet, but it can help you in many ways, like understand your lab results, summarize your complicated medical reports, help you prepare questions for a doctor's visit, offer lifestyle tips, recommend diets and workouts. ChatGPT Health can do all of that. Basically, it can help you connect the dots between your medical history and your daily habits. So what are the pros here? The obvious one is personalization. Instead of generic advice, ChatGPT reads your records and gives you a personalized response tailored to your case and needs. More importantly, it remembers. If your iron was low last month, it will remember that. If your sleep app shows you're not resting, it factors that in. 2, it would mean less Googling and WebMD pages. It helps you decode your medical reports. It helps you prepare the questions. You can ask your doctor things that you may not have understood before or even thought of before. 3, it gives chronic illness support. People who have chronic illnesses, for such people, patterns matter. And AI is ridiculously good at spotting patterns. It can spot patterns in minutes. And that is a benefit. And the last one is convenience. You upload a 12-page medical report and you get a summary in seconds. But it's not all good. Of course, there are the cons, so let's look at those two. The first and the most obvious one is privacy. If you upload your medical records, what happens to them? Will ChatGPT store them? Will it train its models on your data? And remember, health data is a very sensitive subject. Confidentiality is key. And giving it all to an AI bot sounds like a slippery slope. Although ChatGPT says it won't be a problem. Of course, it says that. It says conversations with ChatGPT Health will be stored separately. They won't be used to train AI tools. But still, concerns remain. The second issue is hallucinations. AI can confidently be wrong. ChatGPT is smart, but it also hallucinates. That means it often makes things up. And in healthcare, that can be quite dangerous. The third challenge is regulation. OpenAI avoids diagnosing people, so it does not count as a medical device. That means it does not go through the same strict testing that real medical tools do. And that raises questions about its practices. So AI in healthcare is no longer science fiction. It is already here, analyzing reports, tracking patients, and helping millions of people. The question is not whether AI can do it. Of course it can. The question is, do we have the rules and the framework to let it do this? Because privacy, accuracy, and oversight cannot be optional in healthcare. Real human lives depend on it. Netflix's hit series Stranger Things has finally come to an end after almost 10 years. The finale was broadcast last week. It all began in 2016 in a small town named Hawkins with a bunch of kids. 5 seasons later, the final episodes dropped like holiday gifts. So 10 years later, Hawkins is finally quiet. But the fans are not done. They can't seem to let go of the show. They want spin-offs and prequels. Seems like the internet is still upside down and memes just won't stop. Take a look.